So we have some heavy talk about a college coach shaking up the whole league. And I also got to get into this outside pressure to trade our defensive star while going all in on a future draft pick at QB. Plus, a backup's name is actually gaining steam as the immediate plan. And yeah, we have another defensive coordinator firmly in the mix to lead this team. What is up, fans? I just got here, and we already have some massive things to discuss. And as always, it is straight talk here. No selling fake dreams, so stay with me because this says a lot about where this team is headed. To me, this is not just some insider's daydream or empty offseason chatter. It is a clear picture of how big this franchise really is, especially when a guy like Marcus Freeman, who has Notre Dame in the palm of his hand, a stable project, and insane prestige in college, still becomes the topic of conversation the second the Pittsburgh Steelers name comes up. And it is not because someone leaked interest. It is because anyone who lives and breathes football knows the weight this job carries. Albert Breer did not just say this for no reason. He made it clear that Freeman is not the type to make promises and then back out easily. And even though the Giants and Titans called and poked around, he simply said no because things are good there. The team is coming back strong. But when Breer says that if there is one job that would actually make the guy stop and think, it is Pittsburgh, that says more about the franchise than the coach. And that is where the fans need to understand things without the rose-colored glasses, because the Steelers right now are not the most comfortable job in the NFL. There is no set quarterback. Aaron Rodgers is heading out the door. The roster is aging in key spots, and the window is not clear, but at the same time, it is one of the few places where a coach is not disposable after 2 years, where there is backing, history, standards, and expectations aligned with patience, and for a young coach like Marcus Freeman, that carries a lot of weight. He is 40 years old in his 6th year at Notre Dame, and he knows that if he misses a step, college is less forgiving than it looks, while the NFL usually chews up and spits out young coaches. But not in Pittsburgh, where history shows that when the franchise picks someone, they stand by them. Chuck Noll stayed, Bill Cowher stayed, Mike Tomlin stayed, and they all became who they became because the team did not panic at every stumble. Now, let us be honest, too. If Freeman actually came here, it would not be some aesthetic choice or a marketing move. It would be a calculated risk that would require a real cultural shift because he has never been a head coach in the NFL. He has never dealt with a pro locker room full of heavy contracts, egos, and absurd weekly pressure, and that is a massive jump. But at the same time, he brings leadership, communication, a strong defensive foundation, and a mindset that is very much in line with what the Steelers historically demand. The point here is not whether he is leaving Notre Dame tomorrow, because everything points to him staying put. He made that clear. But the point is realizing that even while saying no, the simple fact that the Pittsburgh name enters the equation makes a guy hesitate internally, and that shows this job is still special even in a heavy transition period after Mike Tomlin. And when the franchise starts a search by hearing names like that, even indirectly, it shows they are not thinking small. They are not looking for a temporary fix. They are trying to figure out which profile can hold the standard for another decade. That does not guarantee they will get it right, but it shows intention. And intention matters a lot right now because after a tough playoff exit and the departure of a legendary coach, the biggest mistake would be choosing out of fear or haste. This idea of trading TJ Watt always pops up whenever the Steelers lose a big game, and it usually comes from the outside, from people who look at cold numbers, ignore the context, and treat a symbol like a disposable asset. And when Colin Cowherd brings this up again, it is no surprise, but it deserves a firm response. Saying TJ Watt is 0-5 in the playoffs, as if that sums up his impact, is just massive intellectual dishonesty, because football is not tennis, it is not one-on-one, and it is definitely not a quarterback carrying everything alone. TJ Watt was dominant in the regular seasons. He changed the entire offensive plans of opponents. He won games almost by himself, and if the team failed collectively in the playoffs, that is on an unproductive offense, a mediocre quarterback, predictable play calling, and a chronic inability to sustain drives, not a lack of effort from the franchise's top defender. Now, that does not mean the discussion is off limits because we are talking about a cycle transition, and that is when tough decisions show up. The mistake is not discussing a trade. The mistake is treating it like an obvious move or some magic solution. Trading TJ Watt only makes sense if it is part of a clear, admitted rebuild with a long-term plan and total alignment with the draft and the cap, not as an emotional reaction to an elimination. And when Cowherd pairs that with the idea of moving up in the 2026 draft to grab Ty Simpson, then things get even more problematic. Ty Simpson is an interesting quarterback. Good numbers at Alabama, a decent arm, mobility, and his reading of the game is evolving. But we are talking about a draft that has not even happened yet, a class that could change completely, and a player who is not a total consensus as a franchise saver. Giving up 6 picks to move up 10 spots for a guy like that is a massive gamble, and the Steelers historically do not make those kinds of impulsive moves, especially giving up a defensive star in his productive prime. And there is another point many people ignore. Trading TJ Watt does not speed up a rebuild if you are not 100% sure about the quarterback you are getting, because you could lose your defensive identity and still miss on the offensive pick. Then you lose 2 pillars at once. The Steelers have always been built from the back forward, a strong defense supporting imperfect offensive teams, and giving that up without a concrete guarantee is playing against the franchise's own history. Now, we also cannot pretend everything is perfect, because it is not. The defense is aging, contracts are getting heavy, and a new coach might want to mold the roster to his vision. So yes, there is a scenario where TJ Watt becomes a trade chip, but that takes courage, conviction, and transparency with the fans, not just some TV show quote looking for clicks. And when someone uses a playoff record to diminish a defensive player, it just shows a basic lack of knowledge about the sport. The real debate is whether the Steelers will choose to truly rebuild or try one more time to stretch out their competitiveness with quick fixes. And until that decision is made internally, any suggestion of trading Watt is just outside noise, not a plan. And outside noise never built anything solid in Pittsburgh. When Malik Willis starts appearing more frequently linked to the Steelers, the first reaction for a lot of people is to turn their noses up, and I get it, because his time in Tennessee was bad, confusing, and lacked development. But if the analysis stops there, it is just lazy. Context changes everything, and his time in Green Bay shows a different quarterback, someone calmer, more functional, and mainly better prepared to execute a plan without trying to be the hero on every snap. And that matters a lot for a team like the Steelers today. They do not have room for a chaotic experiment. They need someone who can keep the offense steady while the roster reorganizes. Aaron Rodgers has 1 foot out the door. Retirement is practically a reality, and the quarterback market in 2026 is just too shallow to guarantee a draft solution without forcing it. Daniel Jones does not exactly fire anyone up. Other names are even riskier bets, and that is where Willis comes in as an intermediate option, not a savior, but a bridge. He is 26 years old, still young, has a strong frame, real mobility, and he showed in Green Bay that he can read the field better, protect the ball, and execute the short game when he is coached well. That game against Baltimore, even in a loss, was symbolic. Almost 300 yards, 18 of 21 passes completed, and commanding the offense with confidence, which is something he never showed consistently with the Titans. That does not erase past mistakes, but it shows growth. And being a QB in the NFL is often about that, the right environment, the right staff, and aligned expectations. The problem is the price, because this kind of narrative inflates the market, and the Steelers cannot fall into the trap of paying an established starter's contract to a guy who still has a lot to prove. If it is a midterm bet with a smart contract, incentives, and roster protection, it makes sense. If it is a desperation move, it does not. And there is another heavy factor in this equation, the draft. The 2026 quarterback class was already considered weak, and when Dante Moore decided to stay in college, the outlook got even worse. Using the 21st overall pick on a quarterback just out of necessity would be repeating the mistakes this franchise has always avoided. The Steelers traditionally do not force a QB pick if they do not truly believe in him, and maybe this is a year to reinforce other critical areas like wide receiver, the offensive line, or defensive depth, while holding down the position with a transitional solution. Malik Willis fits that profile exactly. Someone who gives you mobility, cuts down turnovers if coached right, does not require a total system overhaul, and still lets the team breathe while deciding the actual future. That might not excite a fan who wants a star, I know, but It also avoids the vicious cycle of missing on a QB early and burning through an entire roster. The question is not if Willis is the quarterback of the future, because he probably is not. The question is if he can be the right quarterback for right now, and looking at it coldly, he absolutely can be, as long as the Steelers are honest about the plan and do not sell it as the final answer. When another defensive coordinator enters the Steelers list, it stops being a coincidence and becomes a clear sign of direction. And Ejiro Evero's name reinforces exactly that. The franchise wants someone who thinks about the game starting from the defense and who imposes an identity before any offensive trends. And that is totally consistent with where the team is at, because after Mike Tomlin's departure, the biggest risk is not getting the scheme wrong. It is losing the DNA. Evero is not a big media name. He is not some young offensive prodigy, but he carries something Pittsburgh has always valued, which is solid construction, discipline, and adaptation without abandoning principles. His work in Carolina deserves respect because taking a limited, pressured roster in the middle of a coaching change and still organizing a functional, competitive defense with decent takeaway numbers and an aggressive secondary is no small feat. J.C. Horn and Mike Jackson did not become elite out of nowhere. That comes down to scheme, reading the game, and clear accountability, and that speaks directly to what Steelers fans have been demanding for years: a defense that attacks the ball, confuses the opposing quarterback, and does not just live off individual talent. And Evero's track record carries a lot of weight. He has been through the 49ers, Packers, Broncos, and Rams. He was part of a Super Bowl, and he worked under different coaches and different philosophies, and that builds a head coach, not just a coordinator. The fact that he was kept in Carolina even after a head coaching change also says a lot, because when a new leader arrives and keeps a coordinator, it is because they see real value, leadership, and respect in the locker room. Now, let us be clear, interviewing Evero does not mean he is going to be the pick, but it shows the Steelers are exploring similar profiles: Flores, Minter, Shula, Weaver, and now Evero, all defensive guys, all with solid resumes, all capable of imposing a culture. That might frustrate people who want an immediate offensive revolution, but it also shows prudence, because without a strong defense, no quarterback, whether it is Malik Willis, a rookie, or a veteran, is going to survive in January. The risk here is something else. It is choosing another defensive coach without ensuring the offensive staff is truly high level, because the NFL has changed, and even traditional franchises need to keep up with that. Evero as head coach would only make sense if he came with a strong offensive coordinator who has real autonomy, not just a bystander. But looking at the overall picture, he fits in more than a lot of people realize. A low-key profile, consistent work, very little ego, and a lot of preparation. And that has always worked better in Pittsburgh than a loud name. The Steelers do not need a savior. They need someone to rebuild the foundation, demand a standard, and handle the pressure without getting lost. And Evero, like him or not, seems to be in that group of candidates who get that. What is clear now is that the Steelers are at a decision point that does not allow for middle ground. They either fully admit they have entered a real transition and stand by unpopular choices with conviction, or they keep trying to push this artificial competitiveness until the standard finally breaks for good. The coach, the quarterback, the defensive star, it is all connected, and none of it can be decided by outside noise or social media pressure. The fans need to demand a plan, not just a pretty name. They need to demand consistency, not a shortcut. And that is what I want to know from you. Would you keep the defense as the pillar no matter what? Would you bet on a temporary quarterback solution, or would you go all in on a hard rebuild right now? So comment, disagree, and speak up, because silence never moved this franchise forward.